When we look at the fitness of an organism, you've probably heard the phrase survival of the fittest, and that brings to mind survival of the biggest and strongest and toughest, but that's not always true. Survival of the fittest just means survival of the ones that have reproductive success. It's all about reproduction and leaving offspring, so leaving that DNA in the population. And it's always relative to others in the population, and it also depends on the environment. So the genotypes in the DNA, controlling the phenotype and allowing for reproductive success depending on the environment. An example of that are these little mice, and these I believe are some Florida mice, and they live in an area along the coastline, and gradually over time in the area where they live, sand is encroached on the soil, and we see different colors of mice. If we look, this is kind of a gross picture, but it shows little mouse skins from very light ranging all the way to very dark that have been captured in this area. And scientists have actually done experiments where they take the same number of light colored and dark colored mice and put them in an enclosed area on the light colored sand, and they see after a period of time that the allele frequencies change. They leave them for several generations, and when they come back, if it's on light-colored sand, you'll see mostly light-colored mice. Opposite's true if they have the same number of light and dark mice on a dark background, leave it for several generations, and you see more and more dark mice. That's because this dark one on the light background or the opposite light one on the dark background, they're easier to spot if you're a predator, and so they get eaten more often and leave fewer offspring. And this is an actual little picture of one of the light-colored mice in the study. It's got a little tag in its ear here on the light-colored sandy background. This shows a picture of the mainland, the soil color, and the mice that you find there, and the beach area with the sand color and the mice you find there. Geneticists have actually looked at the DNA of these two mice, and they're the same species. The only difference is one mutation that affects how far. Notice this one has a white underbelly and just dark on top. That's where predators see is from up above. What happened is there was a mutation that allowed this light color to spread further up and around the body. So they're lighter colored mice because that color extends up further on the body to here, so it keeps them camouflaged or disguised a little bit better on this light background. This isn't the only time that mice have changed color. In fact, in New Mexico's Valley of Fire, there's a pocket mouse population that's been well studied, and again has found one DNA mutation that has caused the light mice to turn dark. So there's areas with lava and areas with just sand. Here's a light mouse on lava and a dark mouse on lava. And you can tell if you were a predator, it'd be much easier to find the light mouse. And again, there's another video, so you can pause this one and watch the video on this pocket mouse population in the Valley of Fire and exactly what they found with that population. Next we have adaptation, and I've mentioned adaptation several times, but now we need to look at the exact definition of it. Adaptation is also known as micro is very small changes, so microevolution. And it's microevolution or adaptation that actually occurs in populations, and it helps them match to their environment and be more fit. Remember, fitness is all about reproduction. And both of these animals down here shown in this picture are very fit for their environment. So this lion here, if you look at it, its fur matches its background environment very well. In fact, on nature shows it's commonly stated that you have to really watch for lions because you can have a whole pride of them sleeping in the grass and you don't see them until you trip over the lion because they blend in so well. So the lion is very well adapted. In addition to its coat color, it also has sharp teeth and fangs. It's very powerful. And these porcupines are also well adapted in different ways. So these porcupines, instead of being powerful and having teeth and fangs, they have modified hair as quills. So it's highly unlikely that this lion here will make a successful dinner of these porcupines, because he's going to get a mouthful of quills and likely give up unless he's really, really hungry and determined and catches a porcupine off guard. So both of these are highly adapted and likely to leave offspring. In fact, this one looks like a baby porcupine. So adaptation occurring in these small changes is really what drives evolution. It's very similar to pennies. Does anybody in the class or you guys notice when there are pennies laying on the ground? I tend to walk right past them. I only notice there's pennies when my kids find it and say, "Look, Mom, there's money! Yay!" And I hadn't even noticed, because pennies are small, they don't really buy you much, they don't have a lot of value. It's just a penny, right? However, if you collect all those pennies, gradually over time, they'll increase in value because you have more and more pennies. So microevolution, or the scale that evolution actually occurs on, is like the pennies. At first, you may not even notice it. It's very slight changes that just gradually over time, thousands and millions of years, add up until it turns out to be these huge differences. So these pennies can eventually add up to large amounts of money. Microevolution, tiny little changes, can eventually add up to huge changes and differences in organisms. Evolution also is not driving towards perfection. Evolution does not equal perfection. Evolution, or these genetic changes over time, only react to what's in the environment. Immediate survival. If you've ever seen Alice in Wonderland, the Red Queen at one point is running as fast as she possibly can just to stay in the same place. And really, that's how evolution works. Organisms are constantly changing and adapting as fast as they possibly can. Only problem is their environment is changing and their predators are adapting and their food source is adapting, so everything's moving as fast as it possibly can just to try to stay in the same place and survive. This can even be seen in the Galapagos finches reacting to environmental changes year after year. There are years of drought in the population. If you graph out drought and average beak size, every time there's a drought on the islands, the beak size gets bigger. When there's rainfall, the beak size goes down. And this is matched perfectly. So really wet years, we have smaller beaks. Really dry years, we have larger beaks. The reason for that is, in wet years, there's plenty of seeds around. Small, soft ones, large ones, lots and lots of seeds, because the plants get plenty of water, can produce lots of seeds. So there's food for all of the birds. And the small birds and large birds have about equal reproductive success. However, in a dry year, there are fewer seeds around. The little seeds get eaten up first, and so are not available. And towards the end of the season, when there are baby birds in the nests and these birds are having trouble finding food, only the birds with large beaks can crack open the bigger seeds, all that's left for food. And so these large beaked birds have a greater reproductive success because they can get food and feed their offspring. The ones with small beaks, well, they're just lucky to survive themselves for the next year, and lots of baby birds are lost because they simply can't find enough food. And so the beak size changes, gets larger in proportion, so more large beaked birds survive when there's a drought. So we have more offspring with large beaks, and that shows in the population. If there's plenty of rain, there's equal success, and so the number of small beaked birds increases in proportion. There are different types of traits. Some of them we've talked about before, so there's specific traits, so cleft chin, smooth chin. We looked at these when we did our pea plants, so purples, flower versus white flower, so very distinct categories. There's also continuous traits, so human height is a continuous trait. There aren't distinct categories, so only 4 feet and only 5 feet. There's everything in there, so all different heights. And it's those continuous traits that natural selection can act on in several ways. And we'll look at ways that natural selection can act on these continuous traits. And this chart shows them lined up from short to tall. But if you look at any population, you'll have a few tall individuals and a few short individuals, but overall most individuals in the population will be somewhere in the middle, kind of that normal distribution of a bell curve we've seen several times before. Now, there are different methods of selection that can act on that bell curve. One type is directional selection, that's shown here, and we've used directional selection with things like turkeys. And this is, a human-selected trait, but it can occur in nature too. So humans like to have really big breasts on their turkeys. That just looks really nice on the Thanksgiving table to have this huge bird with lots of big breasts on it. So humans have selected turkeys with larger and larger breasts, so it's a directional selection. It's pushing them away from the small breast size that would be part of their normal distribution into this extreme range of breast sizes. In fact, turkeys are so substantially selected for large breast size that they now have several problems. I always think it's kind of sad every year the president pardons the turkey and they're sent to a turkey farm to go and live out their life. Well, the turkeys only live for a couple months after that because this breast muscle continues to develop and eventually gets so big that the turkey can't stand up and it just falls over and dies because of this exaggerated size of the breast muscle. So that turkey farm is empty since there's no turkeys surviving to actually live there. Also, these turkeys have a big problem because the males have such large breasts, they simply can't position themselves properly anymore on the females. So all commercial turkeys that have this large breast are now artificially inseminated. They collect sperm from the males, and humans transfer that into the females because the males simply can't get in position with that huge breast muscle in the way. So that's an extreme example of directional selection. Stabilizing selection also occurs in a variety of things. Human birth weight and also egg size and things like that show stabilizing selection. If we look at the birth weight of human babies, it's all going to be right around the 6 to 9 pound range. That's a fairly normal human birth weight. We don't see a lot of babies over 9 pounds or under 6 pounds surviving very often because there's selective pressure. So selective pressures pushing the babies to be larger are things that help the baby to survive. So larger babies fare a little bit better. However, if the babies are too big, they have trouble being born and can have complications. So there's pressure pushing them back towards the small end. And so we get this narrow distribution right in the middle between 6 to 9 pounds of babies most likely to survive and do well without any health problems. Disruptive selection also occurs in some species, and this one is less common. One example of disruptive selection is in a certain type of, I think this is salmon, and when they go upriver to reproduce, the very large males of the population will establish a territory and defend it. The females migrate up soon after that, and whatever females are in the territory, the male fertilizes their eggs and defends the territory and protects his females. So if you're a medium-sized male, you're not large enough to defend a territory, and you're going to be chased out of these large males' territory. However, if you're a very tiny male, you can slip into a territory of another male and fertilize eggs and not be noticed and slip back out. So small males can covertly get into territories and fertilize the eggs, so they pass on their genes. And large males have a territory to defend, and they fertilize the eggs as well, so they pass on their genes. So you have very few of the medium-sized fish passing on their DNA. So it's disruptive selection. It's selecting for only very small or only very large males in the population. How about complex traits and behaviors? So complex traits would be things like intelligence and wings for flight and insects. Those are complex traits. How do those get incorporated into this? Well, first of all, is there variation? Is it heritable? And does it impact reproductive success? If your answer is yes to those questions, then yes, natural selection can act on it. So a couple of examples looking at complex traits would be intelligence or memory in mice. When they take mice and run them in this maze, they have to go through the maze to find the treat or the cheese at the end. If they do some selective pressures on the mice, so they take the slow learners, the ones that take the longest amount of time to get to the end, and breed those together, and they take the fast learners and breed those together, eventually over only 6 generations, we see a huge change. They start out at about the same place. The average errors that are or kind of wrong turns that the mice take getting to the cheese. And if you breed together the fast learners, the error rate decreases substantially over time. If you breed together the slow learners, the offspring make more and more errors over time, to the point where the fast learning mice are making about half as many errors as the slow learning mice. So that is a heritable trait that's passed on, and it's a complex trait too. Another thing, looking at insect wings. Well, the argument's been made that insect wings are very complex. How could they evolve? Well, insect wings didn't start as wings. They started as a completely different characteristic. Insects have to regulate their body temperature. Because they're small, their temperature changes quickly if they're in the sun or in the shade, and they have to stay within a range of temperatures to survive. So wings started as little structures on their backs that helped them to regulate their temperature. Basically these veined structures on their back that they could move in order to cool themselves down or to warm themselves up. And gradually over time, that temperature controlling region would get larger and larger. At some point, it was kind of at the maximum size for temperature. Any larger didn't benefit it. However, that's at about the size point where they could get some air under those wings and kind of glide like a paper airplane. So at this point, the wings change from being strictly temperature controlling to also giving them additional benefit. If you're an insect that has these little temperature controlling appendages on your body, and you're in a tree attacked by a predator, and you can jump out and glide with those little tiny kind of stubs of wings, then that's a benefit. So now it changes from being just a simply temperature benefit to being a survival benefit from predators and also ability to find food sources. So a different type of selection starts acting on it and extending those wings even further. The larger kind of thermal regulating regions you have, the better you are at gliding. And eventually we have our insect wings.